Well, welcome to our PPDM podcast series on the importance of data management. We're actually going to be in podcast number 2, our second ever podcast. This is pretty exciting for us. If you're joining us for the first time, I actually would highly encourage you to go back and listen to our first podcast where Barb led our three wise guys in a discussion on why data management matters. So go back, listen to that one if you haven't heard it already. And then come back and join us as we're going to be digging into modern myths around data management. We're going to be talking about some of those the big myths that are out there, why they're myths, and really what the true story really is. We're going to be joined with our three wise guys as we had been in the last podcast, John Jacobs, Tim Coburn, and Jim Crompton. And then I get to the privilege of leading this and moderating this discussion today. My name is Matt Becker. I am the managing director for Selexis Consulting. We are a professional services consulting firm based out of Houston, where we specialize really in all things data. We help our clients, better organize, manage, and leverage their data to make it really more useful for data insights and just treating the data as a true asset. So the topics we're going to be talking about today are extremely near and dear to my heart because this is the stuff I live, eat, and breathe every day in my job and with the teams that I lead. So I am really excited to get going and to hear what these guys have to say. Gentlemen, thank you again for being with us today, and glad to have you here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Glad to be back.
Well, with that, let's just jump right into this. Jim, I know you really had kind of a good take on the modern myths, so I wanted to give you an opportunity to set the stage for what we're going to be talking about today. And then I know we've got a number of myths we're going to go through and let you guys start refuting those. So Jim, why don't you give us your thoughts and your overview on this topic?
Well, the whole kind of concepts of myths, mythology, whatever it is, I mean, it's really part of human learning and our DNA essentially with regard to that. I mean, we live with a lot of myths, even though sometimes we disagree. But it is a way of summarizing knowledge or perspective or opinion around a particular topic. Now, that's good, and it summarizes and helps you kind of move forward. If the myth is really based on a lot of fact or truths or good operating experiences, but there's a lot of myths that kind of, go off course, and all of a sudden they become the mantra. They become the thing that decides our investment decisions or whatever. And so it's really important to examine myths every once in a while, examine our kind of our preconceived notions of what things are, and especially in kind of changing times. So we wanted to try to throw out some of these myths and discuss them a little bit so that we can kind of get an idea whether or not, whether they're effective in helping us make decisions or if they really are leading us down the wrong path.
I love what you said, too, when you said, how we need to make sure we examine these myths. In other words, we've got to be willing to take the time and acknowledge that they're out there. And I also especially liked how you said a lot of times how these myths can become the mantra, right? And almost that becomes the driving force. So I think this is a great way of being able to hopefully refute some of those and help people understand that, hey, these are things you want to acknowledge that you may be dealing with, but then, think about how you can expel those in your own organizations as well. So I love that description. So why don't we just jump right into it then with our first myth. A company can run effectively and efficiently without paying attention to the data. And if I can, John, why don't you take a first pass at that one for us?
Well, this was actually something I was interested in terms of the fact of, is there a particular scenario where this myth would actually be true? And I think I have actually defined something that maybe under this scenario, you might be able to do this without paying any attention to data. And that's if every piece of data your company ever required was auto-generated and unaffected by any outside influence. Human error, electrical sensor malfunction, Murphy's Law. If you're sure all of those cases are covered, you might be able to ignore the data quality and value, maybe.
Right.
Okay? Otherwise, data has to be managed. And it has to be managed well if you expect to get any kind of value or effectiveness out of it. I mean, if you don't know the origin and the source and what has actually occurred to that data over time, there is a lot of doubt, or should be a lot of doubt. The fact that somebody hands you a piece of data or you pull data off of a network someplace or off a disk someplace, if you have little or no understanding of where it came from or what its sources are, that's crazy. I mean, the risk you're taking is huge.
So I'm going to jump in there and holler. This is Tim. So that's all great and wonderful, except when you're dealing with partners and joint ventures who are managing their data in different ways, and you're kind of stuck out there. So that would be great if you're living in a perfect world and living by yourself. But clearly, other companies are doing different things and doing different ways and managing their data in certain ways to make sure they're operating in an efficient way. And if you can't kind of keep up with that, you're going to fall to the wayside pretty fast.
I agree.
I got to say, I know with this being a podcast, right, people don't get the advantage of seeing the video, but I love watching the three of you with your expressions as you're talking about this, right? Because the fervent nodding or just the face making around some of this, it helps to drive home the point of how important this really is, right? And kind of almost knowing that your data has got to tell you too whether you're running effectively or inefficiently, and really knowing what data you have, seems to be a really strong theme with all of this. So. Jim, you're uncharacteristically quiet though on this one. I'd love to hear what you're thinking on this one.
Well, every once in a while you need to close your mouth and open your ears to learn something. But clearly, I think this is one of the more dangerous myths that exists in our thing. And I understand why. I mean, I've been through a number of cycles where we just like the bright, shiny new toy. The tech salesman comes in, and he says, my technology can do this, that, and the other, and you don't have to worry about the data on the going into it because there's so many different checks and balances and intelligent tools and different things within my software that it'll fix all the problems. And you can have, you can come up with data that was never measured by smoothing algorithms. You can have outlier filters, so you can get rid of all the really strange looking points. You can, smooth out noise with different signal to noise processes, et cetera. So in a way, technology can help you with some problems, but we rely on it. It becomes a shortcut to the fact where I don't have to do all the hard work. I don't have to sustain this data management thing over a long period of time. I don't have to look at what data is coming from my partners or from the outside world or do the rest of this, because all I have to do is pay this license fee and take this training, and this technology fixes it for us. Well, after we go through a whole cycle of depending on the new bright shiny toy, and it doesn't work, and we run into the same old data quality problems we had before, then we could just listen to the next tech salesman who comes in with an even better version. We didn't like version 3.2. You can go for version 5.1, right? And there's always something new that can help us. That's really gee whiz. It's really kind of amazing. And we tend to, at times, not everybody, but at times to keep believing in the technology myth that with knowing in our gut that it's not right, and knowing in our gut that there's always the data quality issues that, or even the idea of standards of, am I calling this thing the same thing my partner is? Am I calling this thing the same thing that my competitor is? Yet we're benchmarking against each other. There's so many of these effective and efficient sort of issues that we know really is related to the data, but we try to put a new wrapper on it. We try to put a new solution on it and think that we can get by. But history proves time and time again that while technology is important, it is not going to lead us to the point where we don't have to pay attention to data.
It almost sounds like you're saying that technology isn't the silver bullet that we all would love and hope that it could be.
Unless you try to commit suicide, that silver bullet usually doesn't work.
That's so true.
It would be hard. It'd be hard today in today's environment to really think about a big company that would still believe this or promote this kind of myth out there. I can see where a smaller organization, smaller staff might not have enough time to deal with it and just push it aside. But a big company in our industry is fully aware of what's going on in the industry. The messaging back from consulting, big time consulting firms like McKinsey. I don't mean to promote them in a certain way here, but large consulting firms who have been saying time and time and time again, this is where you make your organization, your company, a lot more efficient. And so, yes, I can see where a smaller kind of mom and pop kind of firm might say, yes, we don't have time for that. But most companies these days, I think, kind of, at least in the back of their minds, know what the right thing is to do. And yet this myth still persists.
So, but to further that, so Tim, to expound on that a little bit, do you think it's fair to say, because I know I've certainly seen this even with the bigger companies, but definitely want to get your guys' take on this. While there might be this acknowledgement that needs to be done, the time and the effort to pay attention to the detail of the data and actually work the data issues, sometimes it feels like it's almost harder with the bigger companies to get them to want to put in that effort.
Well, yeah, there certainly takes a commitment, and maybe the myth is you have to have commitment. Maybe that's the myth here, but certainly you have to have a commitment all the way up from the top to the bottom to manage data effectively in order for it to continue to enrich the organization in the way it needs to enrich it. You have to pay attention to it almost every day, clearly every day, in some sense. And if you don't have a commitment from the top to do that, then that's going to filter down to the other employees, and there won't be a commitment to it. That's just kind of how it works.
Yeah, I think
Tim said something there that's very, very important to reinforce. Is the secret sauce in data management is consistent attention. There's nothing magic in it. There's no, grand. There's a lot of aspects of it that are difficult, but consistent attention is the way that most companies that do this right, that's the secret sauce. And those who go up and down and throw away the staff, hire them back, buy a new tool, et cetera, that jerky sort of reaction to data management is what gets you a lot of the issues we have today.
I couldn't agree.
That almost sounds like that's a standard, that you're sort of setting out there and kind of putting in place. And what's really good about that is that actually ties to our next myth, where we have time to wait for a consensus-based standards approach. And so I'd love to hear how you tie that in, this consensus-based kind of standards approach with the data management problems being what they are today. Tim, why don't you take a stab at that one? I know I've called on John last time. I see you kind of rubbing your chin like you got something really devious to say there.
I don't have any devious, but I'm just thinking about me personally. If I don't manage my finances every day, if I wait on somebody else to tell me how to do it, I'll go bankrupt. And I think that's sort of the issue here. If we cannot wait till somebody tells you this is how it's going to be done. Otherwise, you may have already been sold or lost your business by then. You got to get after it every day. You got to stick with it. And you might not be doing things exactly the right way that others are doing it, but you've got to at least continue to make progress towards keeping things current, keeping things clean, at least so that people know what they're looking at across the entire organization. Not sure that's what you were looking for, but that's what brings to my mind anyway.
Just to jump in here, over my career, the biggest criticism I've heard about standards is it takes too long, right? So,
sure.
And consensus-based processes aren't quick. They do need a deliberate approach. They do need many voices in the room in order to try to come up with the right answers. But to wait for the perfect answer just means you're punting on it. You're putting it off, even if your approach is within your company or within your discipline or within your kind of regional kind of area. If you have a small s standard way of doing it, you can, it's so much easier to then match that with somebody else's different standard way of doing it. But if you just kind of give it up and do ad hoc and don't worry about some sort of common vocabulary, some sort of lingua franca, I guess, if you got about what your data really means, then you can't trust it. I mean, the bottom line is you go through these things. Yes, industry-based standards can be a slow process, but that doesn't mean you can't pick one today and begin and to use it consistently. And by doing that, you will be so much better off when you need to come to, say, merge with a vendor, merge with a partner, merge with then an evolving industry standard when it comes around. But if you never pay it, if you're always waiting for that perfect industry standard kind of thing, it probably will never happen. But that's no excuse for not working on a specific standard-based way of managing your data that you have under your control.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with Jim more. I mean, that to me is part of it's at the heart of the issue, is that people come up with excuses not to adopt the standards that we have. We don't have standards for everything. We know that. I don't think we're ever going to have standards for everything. I mean, innovation continues to progress. We're going to constantly get new types of data in. I mean, this is the nature of the beast. But to put it off and saying, well, we don't have the standards and I'm going to wait for the perfect one, that's just nuts. You're never going to get there. And the fact is that any standards that you can adopt now will save your company time and money in the long run, because it reduces a lot of the confusion and a lot of the issues that cost time and money. And the more that we can implement and the standards that are there, the better off the company is.
So then how go ahead. Go ahead.
I will say again that we are a collaborative industry. We work, the industry is pretty small if you think about it. And we work with partners and other companies all the time. And if those partners are not, and for the most part, they are not waiting. They're moving ahead. If you're taking the approach of kicking the can down the road while somebody else is moving forward, whether they have a standard or not, you're going to be left behind, and you're not going to succeed.
Well, and I think to all of your points, and this actually ties even to the next myth that we're talking about, right? Where you touched on, Tim, the collaboration, right? That standards can help drive collaboration. It can help drive sort of the next steps. But I know one of the things that I think we all collectively see is a lot of times people end up relying on that standard so much that they think the integration problems are then therefore solved. That, well, if I've got the standard in place, then the next set of integration and working the technology should be lickety split, easy to do. And what it sounds like what you guys are saying, right, is, well, no, that's not the case, because the standards are never fully developed.
Yeah, the standards are just a framework within which you can work.
Exactly.
They're not the solution.
So, no, and I think this idea of relating it to the integration problem is solved. I mean, that's what we all would love to believe, but it's not true. I said is the dynamism of the thing, the impact of integration, the impact of, I mean, we had a standard about well naming standards, and all of a sudden unconventional drilling took off, and we've got all these myriad of ways of doing directional drilling that we didn't have before. So all of a sudden the standard, even the what is a well standard in PPDM, had to be kind of updated as you go around it. The myth that I see over and over again is that, and it's related to all the things that we've already kind of talked about, and I'll kind of call it top-down integration or visual kind of integration. Is one of the easy things for your computer programmer to do is write an interface, a dashboard, whatever you call it, cockpit. There's a million different names for some sort of reporting environment. And a lot of people are using that as saying, well, it all looks good, right? We must have the standards behind that because I can create a picture, a performance sort of diagram about where I'm at. Well, the test that I usually give on that is, so take your interface. Now, ask a question about that makes you go one level down into the data, and then ask another question about another level down in the data. And pretty soon you'll see that it is not integrated, that you maybe your question needs some drilling data and some completion data and some reservoir data. And you'll find out that the standardization that you have done is probably functionally related. And what you call as a well, just to build on that example, in a drilling space is not what you call a well in the legal space, is not what you call a well in the financial space. So you get down here and all of a sudden your links start breaking. And that top-down integration only goes so far. And there's really cool tools that, in theory, if your data was integrated, this would work. But you begin to ask those deeper level questions, and you find out that whatever it is that you are trying to do, that the links break and all this, and that's what the lack of integration if you give that. Now, over and over again, we have hoped that we would build a industry universal foundation framework that Tim talked about, that it would all kind of link together that way. And whether it was the early days of Energistics, the early days of PPDM, and now the latest really I think a very important trend coming on here is OSDU, the open source system data universe, open subsurface data universe, excuse me. And we're trying it again. We're trying to create an industry universal framework where all of this data can be integrated in that kind of way. So workflows will work better, performance dashboards work better, automation decisions environments will work better. And those are good themes. OSDU seems to have a lot of muscle behind it right now, and a lot of big players that are backing it. I wish it luck, but other efforts have tended, it's our history, I guess, with the old wise guys here, is that we've seen these things get some of the way there, and then somehow stop. So maybe oil price went down and we stopped putting resources on it, or some major company found their technology didn't work, or whatever the challenge was. We found that these universal frameworks, they'll kind of get bottom up. All the data objects kind of know their relationship to it, a semantic, kind of based approach. But we still struggle with integration, and that may be one thing that will be with us forever.
Yeah, I think that over the years, the three of us have seen this happen. And so integration is the holy grail. We started talking about this. I started talking about this in the 1970s, and here we're still talking about it. So, what are we going to do?
We've seen a lot of these not quite come to the fruition that they should, or maybe more importantly, to the point that we could really take effect, and get good effective use out of these. And I think to a large extent, a lot of that comes from these types of myths. I mean, we always have a tendency with some of these, quote, silver bullets, or some of the integration and the standards that we come up with, to believe they're going to solve all our problems. They won't. Will they reduce a lot of the issues we have today? Yes, I believe that. I believe that POSC would have. I believe that Energistics, formerly known as POSC, yes, they come up with standards. There's value in those. But the fact is that what comes up short is a lot of people think they should be more than what they are. And so they get disillusioned by it, and they don't even take advantage of what value they do bring. And they fall by the wayside. They're no longer supported. They're not funded anymore, and people lose interest. Now, there are exceptions. You see some of them that have had some commercial success, but on the large part, No, and my fear is OSDU has got a lot of good things that it could potentially do. But if people believe this is the ultimate solution and we'll never have to deal with integration or collaboration issues, or they're crazy. Okay. Will it ever get there? Maybe, but it's going to take a lot of effort, a lot of time. And even in the early days, the companies are going to have to do a lot of integration themselves, and they're going to have to start to adopt standards that right now maybe they're not using effectively to have success.
I just want to build on a point that John said. I mean, that we overhype, we overexpect. We essentially, I mean, the developers of these standards, most oftentimes they have developed a scope. They said that this is the problem we are trying to solve, not that. But this inflated expectation, this myth of it will solve everything for me, is where we get into trouble, because then we get to the disillusionment, the disappointment that it won't do this. Well, you go back to the developer and said, well, I never meant for it to do that, right? The open subsurface data universe, I think started practically by saying subsurface and beginning to work on that scope of data. Now you have people saying, well, that'll solve my surface problems. That'll solve my supply chain problems. That'll solve my, well, that's not what it's designed for. So we easily fall into that myth of overhyping that these solutions will solve all of our problems. When we get to that point, then we're pretty much destined to fail.
Yeah, Jim's actually, it's kind of funny because it brings up a little history. We used to have, when I was in the software side of things, errors would come in from some of the user base, and we would classify those as WADs, works as designed. The implication there is that that's not the way they expected it to work. That's the way it was designed to work.
It's a feature.
Well, the thing is, if they had known ahead of time that's what it was supposed to be used for, instead of trying to use it for something that it was not intended for, we probably would never have seen that error. But they had a different expectation than the developer was putting into the software. And this is not uncommon at all. I mean, a lot of this is just a level of communication and understanding between what's being produced by an industry standard like OSDU and what people believe it to be.
Well, so then let's say you've got a collection of industry standards that, not any one standard is perfect, but let's say you're kind of drawing on each one of those, sort of kind of leveraging sort of a best of. And then you've got, let's say on the technology side, you've got some sort of intelligent application, right? And Jim, you talked about it earlier, as you're able to drill down and you're able to bring in the various components, your drilling data, your completion data, right? What are you doing on the fracking side? Whatever those components look like and whatever they are. But then, so how do you then take all of that and deal with the data quality issues that are in there without considering the need of some sort of people interaction, human governance oversight? Because a lot of times what happens is people say, well, we've got the standard, we've got the technology, we'll figure out some way to integrate it, and then it should sort of magically take care of itself. Well,
the latest magic trend is called artificial intelligence and machine learning.
Yes.
And, I'm certainly not capable. I couldn't code my way out of a wet paper bag, but this is an area that I spend a lot of time thinking about and reading about and even teaching about, because we do have tremendous capabilities with the technology data is called data-driven models or whatever, when maybe we even push physics to the side and say, well, the data, the correlation and the classification capabilities of artificial intelligence will figure all this stuff out for me. So I don't need the human being involved in all of this stuff. Well, I totally disagree with that. Matter of fact, there's even, we're starting to get a little bit of a backlash about AI and this idea about AI ethics, because artificial intelligence applications have been used in facial recognition and credit scoring and a whole bunch of different kind of areas where it's proven out to be, you put in bad data and you come out with a biased result. And we're now saying, well, wait a minute, maybe it doesn't work the way we want it to. the role of the human being in this new world, and I think this new world is really, really important. It's a tremendous capability because it adds to our toolkit the way to solve problems when we got a lot of data, but we don't understand the physics. And that doesn't mean the physics that we do know don't provide constraints. But on the data side of all of these algorithms, if you look into the whole idea of machine learning, now there's different ways of, well, how does a machine learn? Well, there's supervised techniques, unsupervised techniques, reinforcement-based techniques, a bunch of other hybrid sort of ways of doing it. The way the human being can get involved with that algorithm and should get involved in that algorithm is at that very first data step. And if the data management expert who knows what is a cat and what is a dog, or what is a well and what is a deviation lateral, or what is an artificial lift unit versus and all the different kind of characterizations of that. If you have the human being providing the answer essentially while the algorithm is learning off its training data set, then you can begin to have more trust in what the algorithm is going to do. The technology, going all the way back to our very first myth, is saying, well, I can do unsupervised learning because I got a ton of data and I got a high performance computing capability, so I can process a whole lot of data really quickly. Well, all that's true, but we get to the point where some of these unsupervised learning models tend to go off course, and they've already proven to be racially biased in some of their algorithms, and they've already proven to be inaccurate in a lot of different ways, where you overstep the boundaries of what it's trying to sort of accomplish. So human beings, even despite the new magic technology, and it's fantastic, but human beings need to manage the data that's the learning set. They need to have oversight over some of the applications as it's going forward, and they need to have an ability to intervene in the right places to say, you've just violated a law of physics here, you've just violated human rights issue here, you've just violated something else here, and then to change it and not just say go from automation to autonomy and let the machine take over.
If I can jump in there just for a second, when I teach this stuff, I hear students talking about machine learning. I hear this in industry as well. There seems to be this belief that the machine has a brain or a mind of some kind, but it's just a machine. It's just a dumb computer. What goes into that computer is put in there by people. People are the brains behind this. And if people don't use their brains to make that computer run correctly, you get what you deserve. That's the bottom line here. It is sort of garbage in and garbage out. You have to train. A computer just does what you tell it to do. And if you don't train that equation or that set of equations that represent the algorithm or the model based on a training data set effectively, then you're going to get garbage out at the end. And this idea of that humans are separated or divorced somehow from the machine learning piece is just not true. It cannot be true.
Yeah, we ran into the same issue way back when we were making the transition to digital. I mean, we ran through this issue that people believed that once data was digitized and on a machine, it was absolute fact. Even though they knew beforehand that a lot of the stuff they were looking at had a lot of errors and a lot of issues, they somehow or another they assumed once it got digital, it was absolutely perfect.
It became alive.
It's the same thing.
Auto magical fix.
Yeah. I mean, if you take something that's wrong and you put it into a machine, I don't care how intelligent the algorithm is, it's going to deal with it incorrectly, especially if it's been told it's supposed to be good information. When it's not going to handle that. So, I mean,
well, I think you guys have proved the point. Just with this, what's the kind of the old learning that you see every time there's a jump step in technology? The fear is it's going to remove people from a job or from an industry. And while at the micro level that might be true, but there's always the need for that human interaction somewhere else, right? New technology might make one job obsolete, but it's going to create at least one, if not other jobs that you still have to interact, whether it's a process, a system, other people, but that the data still has to have physical eyes and fingers on keyboards in order to still make it relevant.
Yeah, and there still must be subject matter experts here.
Right.
They have to be there.
Right. So then to flip that a little bit and sort of a challenge you guys, because as a consultant, I see I end up dealing with this argument quite a bit. Whether it's, do you need internal data professionals, or can you hire and have the consultants do all of that? And I certainly have opinion on that, but I definitely love to hear what you guys have to say. From a lot of times, I'll get with companies and they'll say, well, we don't want to have any data experts in house. We want to give that to the consultant and let them do that, because and let them worry about that. I'd love to hear your guys' perspective on that.
Well, certainly for some companies that's a reasonable solution, I think. But for others, it isn't. You have to consider the risks and rewards there, and what you give up. What do you give up by giving over direction of your data to somebody else on the external side? They don't know your business as well. They don't know what's going to happen down the road. They're just kind of treating the data as they see it, which could be, it's objective perhaps, and it could be very good. On the other hand, that can take a long life of its own and kind of run amok eventually. You can't it's like you can't get them aligned with your company man, you might say, in terms of making it work. And you have to have the company man perspective, or company woman perspective, person perspective, I should say here, because I'm being recorded. You got to have that perspective, because you're using that information again to run your company effectively, based on what your board is telling you to do, your shareholders are telling you to do, and your external consultant is not always going to have that perspective. And you have to still have some kind of hands-on impact to make things work.
I think we talked about this in the earlier podcast as well, that one size doesn't fit everyone, and the fact is that any consultant worth their salt wants to spend time with someone who's knowledgeable inside the company to understand what they actually need and how they want their data to be managed. Yes, can a consultant help? Absolutely. But you better have a knowledge base inside the company that understands the needs of that company, so that the consultant can focus in the areas that are going to give the biggest bang for the buck. You don't want the consultant to say, oh, well, here, I had a solution for Exxon. I think I'm going to take it over to this 50-man shop and give it to them and see if they can just use that. That'll work perfect. It's crazy. It doesn't work like that. You have to have knowledge in-house, at least for a consultant to work with. And to me, there's also the proprietary information, that there is a certain amount of information you probably don't want a consultant touching. There's certain information you probably don't want anyone outside your company handling at all. And you better have that capability in-house to manage that data.
I do think the consultant can be a valuable guide. And I particularly think that they can ask probing questions if you haven't thought about it. It's a different set of eyes on the problem. They raise those issues and they say, what about this? What about that? So that you will actually think deeply about that situation and try to resolve it. I think that's the value added in lots of cases.
But the person you're probing better have an understanding of the question.
That's right. Yeah. That's exactly right, Tim. I can tell you just from my own personal experience and the people on my team, that's what we try to make sure we stress, that, hey, we're we can bring that outside perspective and maybe even some other lessons learned or some best practices that we've seen with other clients, with other customers. But ultimately, even the best consultant wants to work with someone in-house who has been in the trenches, has experienced things within that environment, and that environment being the culture, the technology, the processes, all of that. So, I mean, it's critical to have that internal perspective.
Yeah, the consultant cannot be successful unless there's goalposts and there's guides.
Right.
Yes.
They have to be able to come in and say, yes, we want to help you and we want to be successful, but you've got to help. You got to do your part too, so we can both be successful on this front.
Well said.
I agree with a lot of good comments that all of you have said. I spent 4 decades working for a major operator, bashing consultants, and then I retired and I became one. So I had to rethink my idea of what the role of a consultant was all about. And I agree. The second pair of eyes. Sometimes small companies can't afford that, and the consultant brings tremendous experience and competency and tools to be able to try to help them deal with the problems. There is an issue of the difference between, do I own the result, or am I just delivering a service or a product with regard to that? I mean, I've had consultants who thought success was the operator paid me, and I've had other consultants who said I added value to that operator, and they cared more about it than sometimes that the client kind of representative did. So consultants are all over the place. Many very, very good. Most adding really value. But just to add one thing to what you're saying is, I guess from a larger company perspective, not where I saw the greatest value of consultants was during I'll call it a project, quote unquote project. Now that might be a huge project. Say the integration of Chevron and Texaco was a huge project, and there was no way that either company, with all of the stuff that they were going through to reorganize that company, the corporation, into one, were dealing with, there's no way that they had the resources to be able to integrate all the data between two very large companies. So in merger and acquisition kind of areas, maybe a major SAP release, that's a place consultants have come in and added a great deal of value, because there's a competent crew. We always said the consultant, drove up and emptied the bus of a bunch of young MBAs into the company, but there's a group of capable people following good practices that helped in a time when you didn't have the resources yourself, but you needed to get up and running with at least a combined, consistent data set. Those places, I think consultants are invaluable. I mean, you almost can't do it without extra pairs of hands as you go through these things. So technology upgrades, mergers of companies, and all the rest of that. But for the long term, when you get to this ownership and understanding and knowing not just the data, but the company culture and objectives, I think that's got to be internal. And I mean, I think outsourcing that is abdicating the whole idea that data is a core asset for your company. Hiring resources when you need it is a smart business decision.
Yes.
Yeah, and I like how when you said it's a core asset, right? It's treating your data as an asset, like any other physical asset, right? You've got to care. You got to care for it. You got to feed it. You got to do all of that. I guess as we kind of near the end of this, how would you then tie that back to? So we've acknowledged that we need people who know the data internally, right? But a lot of times you tend to working with companies who you're dealing with the systems person or the process person. How would you guys, characterize the need, and if there is one, around what we've started terming in the industry, right, as those dedicated data professionals, those ones that potentially can highlight like what we would, what sometimes referred to as like the data gems within those systems that people maybe don't know about. How critical would you say that role is? Because I think there's a myth around, well, we don't really need these internal data people, and there's not really much to be found as far as those data gems. How would you guys respond to that?
If I can segue from the last comment to this one, building on Jim's comment, you have a consultant come in one day and you have a new consultant come in tomorrow, you can get 2 different answers. And somebody in the company needs to know what the right answer is. There's to be somebody on staff, well, lots of somebodies, I should say, who know about the data and can tell the consultant how to help the company themselves. That's sort of thinking about that idea. But getting rid of all the data professionals internally is that's just committing suicide. Honestly, it's committing corporate suicide. If somebody has to be in charge. There has to be some adults in the room with regard to data, and so the company can actually continue to work and progress. If the CEO calls and says, "I need to know X, Y, Z," and there's nobody around, and you call the consultant, that's just not going to work.
Yeah, I can't tell you the number of times I've dealt with that situation where I've walked into a company where they've gotten rid of, if they had a data owner or just a senior BA, a business analyst, and they let those people go, and they would have brought us in to do some sort of data assessment, and instead we have to spend a bunch of time sort of reverse engineering everything that's happening.
Yeah, I think the one qualifier I put on this is we talk about these as data professionals. And I think that's the real key, is that these are data professionals. We have a lot of the companies that will lean on what, at least historically in my days, these were techs. They were not necessarily trained as well as they should have been. And they were the ones that everybody was leaning on to deal with the data. They might be the data loaders, but the fact is they didn't have a real in-depth understanding of the data they were handling. Those are not data professionals. They may be necessary people in your organization, but they're not data professionals. So yes, you need to have people inside the company that are intimately knowledgeable and understand the data that your company is dealing with. They have to be there. They have to be there for the consultant, and they have to be there for the company.
That's such a good point. Such a good point.
I think, my experience is that clearly data professional is the right term. And, but it's kind of the Rodney Dangerfield example that they don't get enough respect. When in the roles that I played, whether as a subject matter expert or a supervisor or whatever it is, I sought out those people, and they were obvious who they were if you did ask some questions. They really understood the data, cared about the data, got into the details, knew about it. And yes, there was a technician level that knew how to process all of this data, but there was a data professionals who knew what it meant, knew what this data object meant to some other data object within a workflow. I mean, and those people might not have been rewarded well enough. They probably weren't. They weren't kind of recognized as a profession often as you go through that. But so you can't find them on an org chart. I mean, that's kind of my point is, but you can find them by asking questions. And when you find those people, make friends because they will really help you with a lot of problems, even though it said, I'm not sure about this data quality or whatever, or I need to look into that further, or that data set's been really well cared for, trust it. Those people are tremendous assets when it comes to making decisions. And that's, I learned to make those friends early in my career, and I kept them through the whole, rest of the time. And they just they made me look smart. And there were times when it wasn't me, it was their advice and expertise that really made the difference.
This might not be our subject here, but I feel compelled to say this. We need to commit murder against nerdism. As an industry, we need to hire people who can communicate and who can talk effectively about this discipline that they're part of. We don't want the company, the corporate people looking down on people because they're nerdy or they do computing or they do math. It's not a popular thing sometimes, but it takes it takes a mindset to be able to communicate this effectively so that these people do get recognized. And as an industry, we have not done a good job there.
I agree.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good way to end this podcast today. Sort of that bit of advice and a bit of a next step and a warning, right? The advice being, hey, those data professionals are there in those organizations, and they may not be on the org chart, although I think we all collectively would argue that they probably should be on the org chart in a defined role. But at the same time, it's also making sure giving those people the right support and almost elevating them, support in the sense of helping them be able to be more effective in how they communicate, right? But then also at the same time, making sure that they that there isn't that perception of, well, they're just the data guy. They're just, or they're just, that's the math, and that's the person that's just going to kind of sit in the closet and sling code, so to speak, right? We need to make that more of a prominent role in the sense of, no, if you're care and feeding your data, that's the key to having a good asset. Again, treating your data as an asset. I think the theme here as we wrap up was, and there's so many myths that we could debunk in this, and I know we've been going at this for almost an hour now, but the summary that I wrote down was, it ultimately comes back to what I think we've all said time and time again: people, process, and technology. I think everything that you guys have touched on is, you can't focus on one without the others, and it's all three that you've got to be able to do, really ultimately aiming at getting people as data professionals to be very successful. So what I would say there, guys, thank you very much for your time, and for the listeners, if you're still with us after all of this, thank you also for your time. This was just a lot to unpack here, and I know I'm probably gonna have to replay this for myself just to get some more of this. But what I would encourage our listeners to do is, if you want to learn more about what the Professional, Petroleum Data Management Association is all about, go to ppdm.org. We're actually going to have another podcast coming up too, the role of digital technology. So we definitely would encourage you to tune back in for that next podcast. We'd also love to get your feedback. We'd love to hear what you think about what we've talked about in these last two podcasts. Let us know what you think. Let us know if there's a topic you want us to talk about, what you want to hear the three wise guys obliviate on next, and pontificate on.
Thanks, man.
But with that, again, thank you guys. We really appreciate the time.
Thanks a lot. See you.
All right. You guys take care.